Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry. Plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Joined Up Writing. Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 152 with Becky Robison, a novelist and published short story writer who I invited on the show after reading an excellent Twitter thread she wrote about the realistics of rejection and the hardships we all face trying to sell our novels to publishers. So it's a fun and insightful chat. Before that, a very quick catch-up from me, and this week was a bit of a watershed moment for me in that I actually wrote some brand new words on my novel Safe Hands. I mentioned before that I was changing where the story actually begins, but in doing that I also wanted to see if I could find a slightly different approach to the way I first present my protagonist, to get inside his head a little more and to try to build in more about his hands and his unique way of experiencing the world. It was rough, spluttering, and yet exhilarating to finally manage to free myself from the shackles of the old manuscript. I've done plenty of editing and rewrites for Safe Hands, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to make a clean break and try something completely different to what I'd written before. The good news is, yes, I can, and a big part of that has been coming to the realisation that whatever happens, I've still got that original draft to fall back on. It might sound trivial, but I also duplicated the Scrivener project and renamed the manuscript just to help me make that kind of psychological shift, and it worked. I've also slightly changed the name of my main character, and that's also helping me to adjust. And if this all sounds quite impressive, I know, but I don't want you to get too excited because I only wrote about 400 new words. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a big sense of achievement and that I was actually a little disappointed when I ran out of time to continue. So that's got to be a good sign, right? I hope so, anyway. So that's me, but what have you been working on? Can you relate to any of these things I've been talking about, some of these issues? So if you can, then get in touch and let me know. And you can do that by tweeting me at JUPodcast, emailing wayne@waynekellywrites.com, or dropping me a line on the FB page. But also don't forget to join the mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free. And you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up, as well as being the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, let's get to today's interview with Becky Robison. So Becky is a karaoke enthusiast, a trivia nerd, and fiction writer from Chicago. Her stories have appeared in Pank, Paper Darts, Midwestern Gothic, and other places, and when she's not working her corporate job or walking a dog, she serves as a social media and marketing coordinator for Split Lip magazine. She's represented by Zoe Handler at ICM. Becky's work ranges from horror-tinged flash fiction to coming-of-age YA novels, and it's a great conversation, and I know that many of you will relate to a lot of the things that we talk about. One thing I should add is that Becky and I did have a technical issue when we tried to connect via Skype, and the only way we could get around it was for me to not use my external microphone. So if the sound quality isn't quite up to the usual standard, that's why. Anyway, enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end for the sign-off. Joined Up Writing. Okay, Becky, thanks so much for coming on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you just start off by telling us, giving us a sense of how things are, and tell us where you're speaking from as well.
Yeah, things are going okay. I am speaking to you from my apartment on the northwest side of Chicago. I'm in my living room, and I'm really hoping my dog in the bedroom won't bark while I'm on this call, but she probably...
I was going to say, I can guarantee that she will, but that's okay. Yeah. That's what editing's for. Or sometimes I leave it in. You know, it's nice to give them a little guest slot sometimes, so that's fine. Yeah. So I came across a great thread that you posted on Twitter about your recent experiences trying to sell your YA novel. But before we get into that thread itself, why don't you actually tell us about that novel? What's it called, and what's the premise?
Sure. It's called Thank You for Visiting Ghoulie Grove. And it is about a group of teenagers. So it's sort of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, disguised as a YA novel about a group of teenagers who get trapped in a rundown amusement park where they all work due to climate change related flooding. So there's a flood, they all get trapped in this amusement park, and then a killer starts picking them off one by one, and they can't escape. So it's a murder mystery, but, a bit futuristic. Yeah.
It sounds great. And what sparked the initial idea?
Well, I had always wanted to write a mystery novel because I love reading mysteries, but I was a little bit intimidated because I was worried about how I would include the clues in the right places and making sure that it built in the right way. So I decided to just sort of literally take the structure of And Then There Were None, and sort of transpose that onto my novel, but use obviously different characters, different setting, all of that, so that it's a completely different book in the end. I figured if I used her structure, I would at least get the clues and the reveals, all of that would be in the right place. And I really like that book. So I decided it would be a good place to start. And as far as where else it came from, I grew up in Gurnee, Illinois, which is about an hour north of the city of Chicago, and there's a Six Flags theme park there. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time when I was younger going to the theme park. My parents would get discount season passes at like the credit union, and they'd sometimes just drop us off there just to time. So I spent a lot of time on roller coasters, and I've always thought it would be fun to write a novel that takes place at an amusement park. But obviously in this case, I wanted the place to be a little bit more run down and creepy so that it gave a spookier vibe than just a regular theme park.
Yeah, well, it sounds great. And that's a really good idea, actually, taking a structure of another book or another story like that and just using that as your kind of your template, if you like, your structure. I mean, people do it all the time anyway, regardless of whether they're doing it on purpose or not, in terms of telling the story and the shaping it in that way. But it's a good way to structure, particularly a mystery, isn't it?
Yeah. I think specifically, well, I'm sure in a lot of genres, but mysteries need to be, it's always bad when you're reading a mystery and can solve who did it immediately. And so they need to be drawn out in the right way. And I just wanted to make sure that I was placing everything, every twist and turn in the right place. And I figured that would be a good way to try to do it.
And did you have a kind of in terms of when you set out to write it, obviously you've got that structure, but in terms of, and how it was going to pan out and, what the mystery, how you're going to solve the mystery, did you work that out just through writing it, or did you kind of plan all that beforehand?
I'm sort of an in-between person when it comes to plotting and pantsing, like that distinction. Yeah. So I did plot out the story before I began, but I'm very lenient when things aren't working in a certain way of changing it while I'm writing if it needs to be changed. So I did have an idea, like I knew who the killer was going to be immediately, and I knew roughly why, but a lot of editing went into further drafts to make it. I think one of the hardest things that I missed the first time was there was this mystery going on, and all of the characters were obviously panicked because they were being killed, but no one was trying to solve it. Like nobody was really trying to solve the mystery. Sure. So I had to sort of take my protagonist and another character and sort of, I called it the Nancy Drew draft, where I turned them into detectives.
Yeah.
But I had to, not concretely, but I had to make them do more to solve the mystery so that I think as a reader, you want to be pulled along in the case by someone who's trying to figure it out as much as you are. And I didn't want the reader to be alone in that.
Yeah, and I think it's a really common error, if you like, or mistake that a lot of people make in early drafts or when they first start writing novels, to have your protagonist be too passive and not really have any agency. I think we're all guilty of that at some time, because especially if you've got a plot with something that's plot driven, it's easy to get so plot driven that it kind of drives itself, and so they just get taken along for the ride, as you say.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what was happening. So I had to give Violet a little bit more oomph. I had to give her a little bit more urge to solve what was going on.
Sort it out. Well, as I say, it sounds great, but from what you talked about in your Twitter thread, it's obviously been tricky to place it, and that's despite the fact that you've got an agent. But surely
Yeah.
you just write a book, get an agent, and sell it, don't you? What's the problem?
I wish that was what happened.
So give us a bit of a flavour of that Twitter thread and why, what you wanted to say when that, because like I say, it did hit home when I read it.
Yeah, it seemed to hit home for a lot of people, which is good. That's why I tweeted it. I wanted it to speak to people and let them know that they weren't alone in this process, but I didn't quite expect it to get the attention that it did, and it got a lot of attention. So it was sort of an overwhelming few days talking to new people on Twitter, but I got to meet people like you, which is lovely.
Yeah.
So I tweeted about the fact that despite my agent's efforts to sell the book, and she's a great agent, I really love working with her, nobody was picking it up. And this is the second time this has happened. This is not the novel that I got my agent with. And she was really behind that novel as well. And we worked really hard. We sent it out to editors. And the feedback that I was getting from editors also was pretty universally positive. There wasn't, on both books and on Ghoulie Grove, there just wasn't a lot of feedback that would have been helpful in doing edits or revising. It was mostly just, I really enjoyed this novel. It made me laugh, but I just don't see a place for it in my list right now, or I just can't take it on right now. And I think that's something that they don't tell you that can happen. Like you said earlier, it seems like, oh, you get an agent and then your agent sells your novel and then boom, you have a novel out in the world. Perfect. But that's just really not the case, because there are so many other factors that can come into play, just like personal preferences. I volunteer at a lit mag, so I know firsthand that we get a lot of really wonderful stories that we can't publish, not because they're bad, just because there's not room for them or they don't fit the issue right then. So personal preferences come into play, but also market forces, like there's my dog, but maybe a book just doesn't fit into what the market wants at that moment. So, or what they perceive the market wants at that moment. So that can be another reason why the novel doesn't sell. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've written a terrible novel. It just means that things aren't working out in that moment. And so I wanted to share that just so that people, I think we're kind of inundated with success stories, and I wanted people to hear that other writers go through these periods where things just aren't quite working the way they'd hoped. And I got a lot of responses from people thanking me for tweeting it because things were also not working out the way they'd hoped. I got a lot of responses from authors who said, yes, I didn't sell a book until my third or fourth or fifth book. Or people who couldn't sell things and stopped writing for 10 years and then started writing again and then they sold something. So it's, I think we get overwhelmed with these ideas of success and how it has to come immediately or it has to come when you're young. And I think that's not always the case. So that's what I was going for with the thread. And obviously it spoke to people.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of one of those like dirty little secrets that you get in the publishing industry to a certain extent. It's like the other one is that most people have got an actual job that they don't write full time. And it's one of those things we don't. I know you have, but a lot of people, even when they have, they kind of don't say, or they're sort of not told not to say that, but they'll often be said, "Well, don't make a big thing of that. Just kind of make out you're a full-time writer." And obviously, that's for most people, that's very, very difficult to do.
Right. Yeah, I work full-time at an insurance company, doing internal communications for them, and that's what supports me. That's how I have health insurance. That's how I can pay the bills. And then I write when I can. So I write on the weekends. I usually do some marathon writing. And then I steal time on weekdays when I can.
Yeah. And how do you go about that, like fitting it around sort of real life? And not just in the sense of time, but obviously real life and real jobs and everything else, they do kind of have an impact on how much headspace and the rest of it you've got. So how do you kind of tackle that?
I guess I just try to be flexible and generous to myself, so if I've had a really tough day at work and it's been extremely busy and I've had a million meetings and I'm really tired after work, I'm not going to make myself write, because what am I going to turn out that's good then anyway, if I'm just exhausted. So like I said, I do a lot of marathon writing on the weekends. I typically try to either steal time, like if things are very slow at work, sometimes I steal time at work. Usually around holidays, there's not a lot of people there, so I can squeeze in some time at work. It's sometimes a little bit easier to like edit at work rather than write new. Try to steal time when I can, and then if I'm having a day where I feel confident and I feel good, I'm not a good morning writer. Some people really are good at waking up at like 5 a.m. and all that stuff, and my brain doesn't operate that way. But if I'm feeling okay after work, sometimes I'll write after work on something. So it's just a matter of being flexible and letting my body write when it wants to write. That said, I think I'm also pretty good at squeezing little things in. When I first started writing, I hadn't written for a long time, and I started writing more seriously after I graduated from undergraduate, after I graduated from college. And so I had this job and I would commute on the train. And so I started writing on the train. I had about a 30-minute commute there and back, and I would just write these little flash fictions, and I would try to finish one before I got to work. And that's really how I started writing more seriously. And so I think I've gotten used to taking, like, if I only have 40 minutes or something and I want to just write a paragraph, I can sort of squeeze that in. But I think it's just a matter of being flexible. I think that we're often told that to be a writer, you have to write every day. And I think it's good. Like, if you want to write every day and you feel good writing every day and you have the space to do that, then sure, do what you want to do. But I also think that there are a lot of people who have responsibilities that sometimes preclude that. Like, I don't have kids or anything. And I think that would be an even bigger responsibility, where you're working and you have kids and you're trying to write. So, I think people should be a little more forgiving of themselves if they can't write every day.
Yeah, that's a great idea. The doing the flash fiction on the commute and having that timed. It's almost like a timed writing exercise, and the fact that you're trying to make yourself sort of finish something in that time. That's a great idea. It's a good way to kind of strengthen that muscle, if you like.
Yeah, I found it really helpful.
Yeah. And so obviously it's been tricky with the YA novel, to say the least, to have to deal with the rejection again. So how do you deal with the rejection, and kind of what's your plan going forward with it?
Well, the rejection obviously doesn't feel good. It made me feel I keep reminding myself that it's okay to feel sad, that I don't have to, immediately recover and bounce back. I think that Twitter thread was really helpful because it did get me a lot of comfort from people who were going through similar things. But it also was sort of bittersweet with everyone being like, oh, I'd read that novel. And I thought, I'll the editors who rejected it. So it's hard. But at the same time, like I said, I think working at a literary magazine helps, because you see how often things get rejected, just not because they're bad, but just for other reasons. And so I think you just have to keep in mind that as a writer, you're almost certainly going to get rejected more frequently than you're accepted. It's just a fact. You're just going to get more rejections than anything else. So I think you sort of have to steel yourself to that and accept that it doesn't mean you're a bad writer. And of course, I'm not immune to those feelings. I have group chats with my friends. So when this is happening, I'm, messaging them all the time, asking them like, oh, am I a good writer? Please tell me now if I am deluding myself.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I've been going through something similar myself recently, so I totally get that.
Yeah, but so I'm good that I have supportive friends and family, and a lot of writer friends who know what it's like, so that's helpful too. And then as in terms of what I want to do with the novel, I think I'll probably keep working on it. I am working on something new, another novel, but I think what I'll do is I'll keep holding on to it, because there's always the possibility to, I know sometimes people call them trunk novels, but, there's a possibility that if I sell something else someday and they want another book, well, it's like, well, I have another book. It's right here. Here's another book. So, so it's possible to use it in that way too.
Yeah, and I think the other, I mean, I suppose I kind of read down, after I'd read the thread, I kind of read a lot of the comments that were on the Twitter feed, and I know a lot of people were sort of asking you what you were going to do. And you made the point that, you've kind of got a lot of really positive feedback, although you haven't been picked up, you've had lots and lots of positive feedback. So it's not even like you've kind of got some sort of general direction or some pointers as regards what you could, in inverted commas, improve or whatever. So, you say you're going to carry on working on it, but to what end? Have you got things in your mind that you think, well, this could be tighter, or I think I'll try this, or could you think you might just be changing it just to see if it fits somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure at this point. Right now, I'm focusing on this other thing I'm writing, and I think with Ghoulie Grove, it would be a good idea just to check in on it, maybe like after I've done a few drafts of this new, just so that I can look at it with fresh eyes, and maybe there was something I was missing the first time around, or not the first time, not like I was sending out a first draft, but maybe I'll notice something then that could make it a little tighter or make it a little bit different. But as of right now, I'll hold on to it, keep working on this new novel, and see where that goes. And I mean, I'm also trying to edit and submit stories, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So let's just take a bit of a step back then for a minute. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and what your earliest memory of writing is.
Sure. So like I said, I grew up in Gurnee, Illinois, which is a northern suburb of Chicago. And when I was little, I wrote a lot. Like when I was a little kid, I wrote a lot of stories as soon as I could learn how to write, because I loved reading. And so I decided that I would like writing too. So I wrote a lot. When I was in second grade, my best friend Meg and I wrote a 100-page book of ghost stories. But, it was like those child pages where like half of it is for coloring. And,
sure.
And I didn't really know what like plagiarism was, because we were 8. So some of them we'd heard. But, so I really loved writing. And then I don't know if this is just because of the schools I went to. I sort of went to a lot of like smaller Catholic schools, but there weren't a ton of like extracurriculars or elective classes. So there weren't a lot of creative writing classes, anything like that. So I didn't do a lot of writing, honestly, from probably about the age of 12 to the time I graduated college. Like I was always reading. I still read a lot, and I studied English literature at university and history. And so I did a ton of reading, but it was only after I graduated college that I started writing again. And like I said, I started writing on the train. I would write little flash fictions in 30-minute bursts or so. And then I started writing longer stories and other books in my spare time. I actually started a little writing group in Chicago, miraculously on Craigslist, and we didn't we're totally weird or anything. It actually worked out.
That's great.
Yeah. And then after a few years of writing, I sort of wondered if I could get into an MFA program, and I did. So I got into the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which was a wonderful experience. Las Vegas is really cool. I think a lot of people think of it, in only one way, from movies and stuff. And it's a really working class town. And it was neat to be there with a bunch of other writers, and we were all focused on the same thing. And our cohort clicked really well. So that was nice. But yeah, I don't know. So it was a great program, and I was really happy to do it. And then I graduated from grad school and got another job and kept working on my writing. So that's sort of where I am now, a few years out of grad school. I'm actually more than a few years out now.
So obviously and I know you've had lots of stories and bits and pieces published. So can you remember the first one that sort of landed, and how you felt when it got picked up?
Oh boy. I don't know if I can remember the first one, but one of the first ones was my story Radioactive Teeth, got published in Paper Darts. It was runner-up for a contest. And that one was really exciting. A, because I loved that story, but B, because it just got a lot of like feedback from random people. Like I've talked to random people on the internet who said, "Oh, I loved your story in Paper Darts." And so that one was just really exciting. It was also cool because that magazine sets up illustrators to work with you. So they had like illustrated the story, which was really amazing. I don't know. It just felt for the first time like, oh, this is like a real publication. I don't know. And so that was really exciting to me.
And what would you say you've learned from writing short stories so far? I mean, obviously at this stage you've written lots of short stories, but also written a couple of novels as well. But what do you think you learned from writing short fiction in the first instance?
Well, I think so. I write a lot of flash fiction, so under 1,000 words. And then I write novels. I have a really hard time writing a normal, like 8 to 30 page short story. I don't know why. I just have a really hard time finding stories to tell in that length. I've written probably 4 of them or something. Mm-hmm. But I think the benefit of flash fiction or shorter fiction in general is just teaching you how to compress. So you're not having, so that when you do get to writing a novel, you're not meandering all over the place. And I also, when I do write novels, I think of them very much based in scenes, which I think comes from writing shorter fiction. So I don't think of it as like in chapters or in like an overall plot as a whole. I think of it largely in scenes, like I'm writing this scene now. It's almost sometimes like I'm writing little stories within the story, even though I don't think it reads like a collection of flash or anything like that.
But you're sort of tying it together in your mind like that. And how did you go? Well, you kind of alluded to it earlier. You said about writing your first novel. So tell us a little bit about that in terms of what that novel was and how you secured your agent.
Yeah, so that novel was the one I wrote for my thesis grad school. One of my goals in my MFA program was to write a novel just because I had never completed one before. And so I figured, well, I'm here, I'm in my MFA program, let's go for it. So that one was a little bit more autobiographical, although not totally autobiographical because I definitely made stuff up for it. But when I was younger, I was in this Christian theater group that I eventually had to quit because it was a little extreme. So I write a novel about 3 teenage girls who try to undermine their Christian theater group's production of Godspell with the slightly edgier music and theology of Jesus Christ Superstar. So it's, I don't know, it's more of a coming of age situation. There's a lot of queerness in it. One of the main characters is queer, and one of the other characters sort of has trouble like accepting that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I just wanted to write more about teenage girls, and I love musicals. So I don't know. I brought that into it. And so I wrote that for my MFA. I spent more time after I graduated editing it because obviously I didn't want to submit it to agents. It wasn't a first draft when I graduated, but it also wasn't, where I wanted it to be.
Sure.
I worked on it a little bit after that. And then I started querying agents, I believe in like very late 2017. And that is a whole, I mean, you've probably talked about querying agents on the show before, but it is a process. So I did a lot of research online, and I'm glad I did. So I ended up finding a lot of useful resources. Query Tracker is easily the best one. That's so important, I think, when you're querying agents. It's free. You can sign up and see, you can search agents by genre or by, age group of what they represent. You can find links to different interviews they've done or bios, so you can see what their interests are. So I built myself a list of agents to query, and I think there were about 80 agents on the list. And that actually I did do it at work a lot of the time. Like at the end of the day, I would, craft a cover letter or, a query letter and sort of start querying agents. I tried to do 2 to 4 a week. And I think out of that 80, I got like 10 requests for partial or full drafts. And then I only got 1 offer, which was my agent, Zoe. And it was so funny. Like her dad had actually been in the original stage production of Godspell. And, so she connected with it in that way. And she just really liked the book and liked the voice of it. I tend to write very voicey fiction. So yeah, so she wanted to sell it and I was so excited and we did try to sell it, but it just didn't work out. And I think I wasn't as devastated that first time, not because I didn't want it to be out in the world, because obviously I did, but just because I know that, it's like a first try, right? It's a first
Sure,
novel.
yeah.
So it was a little bit harder when the second one also didn't sell. That was pretty brutal. I figured a murder mystery would be more marketable.
Yeah, well, as I say, I mean, it doesn't help you at the moment, but I agree. I mean, it does sound like it's definitely got commercial legs. So hopefully at some stage that will find a home. I'm convinced it will. But like, as you say, it might just take you to get your third book out there before you can come back around and
Yeah.
because it's quite a common story actually on here. There's lots of authors that I've spoken to that have had very similar experience, and their second book their second published book is often the book that was they wrote before the one that got published, if that makes sense.
Right.
That's often the case. It's like, okay, well, now you're interested. I've also got this book, and because they've got their foot in the door, they can kind of get, picked up. It's a little bit easier to get picked up. So I do hope that happens for you.
Yeah, me too.
So what would you say drives you to write? Why do you think you write? Why, as you said, you've got a busy job and all the other stuff that goes on in life. So why bother to sit down for hours at a time and write?
That's a good question. I think it's entertaining to me. Like, I like making up stories. And so I think that's a big part of it. Also, I think I love reading so much. And there are so many books that mean a lot to me and have impacted my life. Even if they're not books that you theoretically think would impact a life so much, even if they're very like entertaining or funny or flighty, sometimes that really can, impact my life in a way. And I want to be able to do that for other people. I admire authors so much and I want to be one.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you think's been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given along the way?
Gosh. I guess, okay, so let me think. A couple of like concrete things that I think about a lot. In our MFA program, we had a lot of guest authors come in, and one of them was Kristen Valdez-Quaid. I think she has a novel coming out, but she also wrote a story collection called Night at the Fiestas. And she said something that I think about all the time now, which is that if you are writing an otherwise realist story and something magical happens at the end, you probably don't have the right ending. So if like you're writing a story that's otherwise takes place in a very normal world and something like very strange and mystical happens at the end, I found that happening a lot in my stories. So it's helped me to revise a lot. Another thing that I think is really helpful, I met Neil Gaiman once at a book signing right before I started my MFA, and he was really generous with his time. Like, I was just in a book signing line, and I told him that I was going to get an MFA, and he like took the time to stop and talk to me. And he said to always remember, like, before you focus on like pretty words or descriptions, that like story has to come first, because you can write all the pretty words you want, but people aren't going to read it if there's not a good story behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to remember. And then I think just this comes from a lot of different writers, but you have to finish the thing. Like, you can't be a writer if you don't write it. So you don't have to write every day, but you have to actually go through it and finish a thing. So you can't just put it off forever. Sometimes you just have to take that plunge and finish the story.
Yeah, I agree. That's great advice. So if you were starting again tomorrow as a new writer and you were starting from scratch, what, if anything, would you do differently, or what would you go back and tell your younger self?
That is also a good question. I think I would tell myself to just write about subjects and things that I want to write about, not write about things that I think other people want to hear. Because I think initially there were, I'd read things and think about, oh, people want to read this kind of story or that kind of story. And I think now I'm a little bit freer from that and writing more of the things that I just really am interested in writing about. But I think that's really important, to just write about what you want to write about and do not even think about what other people want to read. Just write the thing you like.
Yeah, because apart from anything else, you're going to be spending a very long time working on it.
Yeah.
So it may as well be something that you like.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good place to kind of wrap things up. But where can you give us a sense of what's up next? I guess it's a little bit up in the air with everything that's going on, but give us a sense of what's up next, but also where people can find out about you online and stuff.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm working on another novel, so that's what I'm doing now, just plugging away. I'm actually typing it up because I wrote the whole thing by hand, so I'm typing as I go. But I have a website, so you can find me at beckyrobison.com. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram, although I think my Twitter is more interesting, but at the same place at REBB003.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all those in the show notes. But it's been great to talk to you, Becky. Thanks for coming on. And thanks for putting out such a great Twitter thread that obviously connected with lots of people. But for the time being, thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. Joined Up Writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Becky Robison, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That pretty much wraps it up for this week, but don't forget to get in touch with all your thoughts on the show, your feedback, and to tell me what's going on in your writing world. And you can do that by dropping me an email at wayne@waynekellyWrites.com. Also, remember, you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from, and that way you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every time. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever, as it really does help others to find the show, or, just recommend it to one of your friends. So that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.